Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise. We bring you interviews with professionals in the movement and exercise field. The goal is to provide information for other professionals and also amateur movement aficionados, people who understand that movement is part of what makes life complete. Some of the people we interview you will have heard of. They're well known in and outside of the movement and exercise profession. Others you may not have heard of, but they have a great deal of knowledge to share. Many people doing the best work spend their time working with people, not working on their social media presence. We're going to give you a chance to learn from some of these talented and knowledgeable individuals, and we're going to learn along with you. Moving to Live podcasts are going to be short. Each interview will be long enough to impart usable information, but short enough to be able to be consumed in a single bout, during your workout, commute, or even during dinner prep. We all like long-form interviews, but time is valuable. Moving to Live wants to give you the option to learn and be entertained without needing to commit 60 minutes at a time for an interview. Give Moving to Live a listen. Check out our sister podcast, FitLab PGH, which highlights people, businesses, events, and activities in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area that make movement a priority. Moving to Live would love to hear from you. Want to connect with us or have an idea for somebody you think we ought to interview? Drop us an email, mov2liv@gmail.com, or connect with us on Instagram and Twitter, both _mov2liv. We're excited to bring you these interviews, and we think you'll enjoy each and every one that we bring you. Thanks for taking time to listen to this episode of Moving to Live. Whether you're a first-time listener or a long-time listener, we appreciate you taking time to learn from our guests just like we do. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to leave some feedback for us with a review on whatever podcast app you use. And please tell your friends and acquaintances that you think might be interested in learning more about movement and the movement lifestyle about Moving to Live. I think you'll enjoy today's guest, Dr. Erica Boling, who owns Northeast Canine Conditioning. Dogs are athletes too, and I think after listening to this interview, you'll agree that that's true. Welcome back to another edition of Moving to Live. As you may have known from past episodes, our goal is to break down knowledge silos. At the end of the day, no matter where you are in the movement field, you probably have one of two goals: to make people or four-legged animals move more, or make people or four-legged animals move better. And you've heard in some past interviews, we've talked to some individuals who are involved professionally with dogs. You've heard me joke before that sometimes I find guests by, in the nicest possible way, stalking them on the internet and seeing posts that they make. In the case of tonight's guest, I believe I first saw her posts on Instagram, and I saw Northeast Canine Conditioning. I was like, well, what's that? And I looked it up, and this is a lady who has a business for working dogs and for athletic dogs to train them, not to train them to sit, to stay, to do various tricks, but to train them physiologically, just like if you or I go to a fitness trainer or a strength coach to improve our fitness for our activities. So today we are with Dr. Erica Boling. She is the owner, founder of Northeast Canine Conditioning. We're going to find out a little bit more about her story of what made her decide that this was a good idea and an interesting idea, and how she got to this point. So Dr. Boling, thanks for taking time for talking to Moving to Live.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Question I always like to start Moving to Live interviews out with is, tell us your elevator spiel. You get on the elevator and you're carrying a briefcase, or you're carrying a t-shirt, or you've got a dog with a harness on that says Northeast Canine Conditioning. Somebody says, what is that? What do you tell them?
I tell people, I help people take their sport dogs and working dogs and turning them into the elite canine athletes that they are and that they should be. But I guess when I talk to people, kind of wonder, like, what exactly is this? It's kind of like if you think about a personal trainer and fitness training to keep our dogs fit and healthy. But I do specialize in the sport and working dog world. Of course, it helps all dogs, pet dogs, working dogs, and sport dogs. But when you think about the kinds of work that we ask them to do, we really need to prepare them, physically for the demands of the work. And that's where the athletic part comes into it.
And we're going to get more into that a little bit later in the interview. As I mentioned before we started recording, one of the things that I find most interesting, and I think a lot of the the listeners find interesting is the stories of how people get to where they are. You and I were chatting a little bit before recording, and you're saying, yeah, so many people say, oh, it must be wonderful to have this business where you can do whatever you want. And we know it doesn't start there. So I guess starting out, you are involved in the movement field. And one of the things I'm always curious as I get older is, were you an active mover growing up? And if so, is this something where mom and dad said, hey, get out the door and don't come back till dinner time? Or was this the sort of thing where maybe mom and dad were active, or you grew up where mom and dad maybe said, you're going to do yard work with us?
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about it from the mom and dad perspective, but I have an older brother, an older sister, and a younger sister. And just from, elementary school, being 8 years old, I just remembered my brother played Little League Baseball. I wanted to play Little League Baseball, and I had to be on the boys team. I was like the only girl who played. And as early as I can remember, probably my first involvement was probably around 7, 8 years old, playing baseball. As I got older, it went into softball. I did a little bit of volleyball and basketball at school. Did a little bit of tennis for fun. My very first job was as a swim instructor at 15 years old at the YMCA. And actually, after you had invited me to be out here, I was kind of thinking about that, and it was interesting because I started listing all the kinds of activities I've been involved in. I was like, wow, I've really done a lot, from it being an aerobics instructor. In my early 20s, I took up karate. In my 30s, maybe it was mid 30s or later, I took up boxing. I've run marathons. And so, you actually made me reflect on that before we got on today. And it's like, I don't know what prompted it. Maybe just, seeing my older brother was, playing on the Little League team, and, my dad would play baseball. He taught us how to throw, how to catch. And it's just has always been there. Yeah.
And I know from looking at the brief bio you filled out beforehand, you really fit the ethos of Moving to Live, that movement is a lifestyle. What I really found interesting, one of the questions we ask is what fitness means to you. And I think what's interesting is, the more interviews I do, the more similar answers I get. And your answer was that the main reason was for psychological and mental reasons. And I know I interviewed a sleep researcher, Dr. Ian Dunnican, a few months back, and his comment was, it's non-negotiable for me, if at all possible, I move at least an hour a day, not for the physical benefits, but for the mental benefits. And you found the same thing too. And I know from reading your bio that you have been involved in higher education. And I'm just curious, as somebody who was also involved in higher education, did you find back during your higher education career that some of your best ideas came when you were moving, not really thinking I need to do this, but some of your ideas?
I don't know if it came while I was moving, but when I never dreamt that I would ever run a marathon. And when I actually started training for a marathon was when I was writing my dissertation. And so you'd spend hours and hours, sitting at your computer, working and doing research and writing chapters. And then I would go out and run like 15 miles. And that was interesting. But, and another interesting thing was when I took up boxing was when I went through my divorce. And before, all the challenges of, do I get a divorce? Do I not? And all that struggle and turmoil of what to do with your life. And I tell people, boxing was my therapy. And they were, key things in getting me through, stressful and challenging times. And I don't know if it was so much the creative moments came while I was doing it. It was more of a stress reliever. But then afterwards, after doing the exercise, then I could be more settled and more focused.
It's kind of like if you have a puppy or a dog, a tired dog is a well-behaved dog. So kind of to transfer it from that, we hopefully are a little bit more intelligent than dogs, but if you relieve the stress and you relieve the psychological pressure from things going on in life, very often it's like, oh, well, that wasn't quite as bad as I thought it was. I can think, I can move on and figure out how to move forward.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's totally why, I move and exercise to keep my sanity. The physical benefits are a great bonus, but that's not why I do it. I do it for the emotional and the psychological effects of how I feel after moving and whatever activity is and being active.
And I know I've heard many physicians say that, movement or regular physical activity is a very powerful benefit for the mind. And I think that's dramatically unrepresented and unrecognized by many of us.
Yeah. And so, so I guess that kind of the beginning of the journey, started with my interest in that. And then I got involved in dogs. I always grew up with animals. And when I got a Doberman, this was probably about 11 years ago. And I wanted to do something more meaningful than, just like obedience and like fun competition. So I actually got involved in search and rescue. And, just felt like I was doing something more meaningful and, helping the community versus going out and just like winning ribbons. and after her, I got involved with protection sports and got a Belgian Malinois and participated in a sport called French ring, which is, I think it's one of, if not the most physically demanding sports for dogs. And they have huge, they scale a big wall, they do really broad jumps, they jump a 1.2 meter high hurdle. They do the protection work. It's a high impact sport. They're running at full speed down a field, and the impact that they hit, the decoys, and I love, I always love the more physical sports, the more contact sports. Like, I love the karate, I love the boxing. It's just something about, just the impact, versus just say meditating and, doing things that aren't quite as physical. So I guess it's kind of natural that I was drawn to that kind of sport with my dog. And basically what happened was my dog got injured. And he had a pulled muscle that was misdiagnosed. It took almost over 10 months, almost a year to get him diagnosed properly. And as he was rehabbing, and it was almost a year to get him back to competition, as he was rehabbing, I started studying and learning as much as I could about massage and fitness, because I didn't want this to happen again. And what I found out was there had been all kinds of signs all along the way that there had been it was a chronic issue that had been misdiagnosed, and I kept working him. He wasn't limping, very rarely. And the more I learned, I found out that there had been signs all along the way that I had missed, the veterinarians had missed, and things that I should have been able to catch if I had been more knowledgeable. And then I also found that the way I was training was not the best way to be training, that, I kind of set him up for that injury because I was not cross-training him. I did not have a balanced fitness program. I just kind of focused on my activities for the sport I was doing. And I was very, kind of tunnel vision. And so that's kind of where it all started, was just learning more about it to keep my own dogs fit and healthy in the, the high energy, high impact, kind of more strenuous activities that they were doing. And I think what happened is my natural background and interest in just physical activity, I guess it was just kind of natural that I then brought that and extended that to the work I was doing with dogs.
And I think it's very interesting you said that you kind of set your dog up for it. I recently lost a dog with epilepsy, but this was a dog about a year ago. When she was still alive. And one of the things I do with my dogs is they move 45 minutes to an hour most days of the week. And just because of the time of year, I was doing most of the work on hard surfaces. And my vet said, her paws are wearing down because she's dragging her rear paws because of the medicine. And I switched immediately to 100% soft surfaces. And immediately I felt better too. And it's kind of, I'm like you, it was kind of a head slap. It's like, well, of course, when I train for marathons, when I run on soft surfaces, I feel better. Why shouldn't it be the same for dogs? And it's amazing how you can have it right in front of you, something that in hindsight you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. But until it's actually pointed out to you, you don't realize what's going on.
And that's exactly what happens when I've done seminars where, like sometimes my audience, the owners of the dogs, like competition dogs, are, people themselves who are athletes, or in high school and college, they were athletes. And so I'm sitting there talking to them about how to treat their dog like an athlete. And then all of a sudden that light bulb clicks on. They're like, yes, oh my gosh, why? Of course. Why wasn't I thinking that? And it was just like they just needed somebody there to open their eyes and be like, yes, all that stuff you do for yourself. And, when you put, when a football player doesn't just go out and throw a football 7 days a week, they're in the gym, they're lifting weights, they're getting massages. And a lot of that, for the people who are active themselves, a lot of them, most of them, they don't make that immediate connection to their dogs unless something prompts them.
And for those of us who have dogs, I mean, when they enjoy being active, they don't really tell you, as you said, that they're hurting. If you tell them to go, they're going to go. I know we interviewed somebody for FitLab Pittsburgh who works and he does Schutzen with his German Shepherd. And he said, you break out the harness and the dog's ears go up and it doesn't matter what, he's ready to go.
Exactly. And that's the kind of dogs that I work with the sport and working dogs. We tend to get those really high drive, really strong, they're bred for this crazy drive. And, a lot of these dogs that if you ask them to go, they will go and they will kill themselves. They'll give themselves heat stroke. I've known, police dogs that have, jumped over. Oh gosh, one was in a parking garage and the dog was chasing, I wasn't sure it was pursuing a guy that was robbing a place. But I mean, the dog just literally jumped off this parking garage. I don't know how many stories up he was. And part of what I do is helping educate the handlers on some of those very subtle signs that we get from our dogs, that they are, not 100%, that there might be some kind of sign that something's off. And then also to help a lot of people, it's almost like having eyes on the back of your head. You just kind of, when you have these types of dogs, teach yourself you really got to be careful of your surroundings and, be watching out for them, because those really driven dogs, it's when they get into that high drive, they just don't think. They're just, and they're, whether they're chasing something or whatever it is, they're not paying attention to often, what their body's doing, and that puts them in danger.
We're talking to Dr. Erica Boling. She is the owner of Northeast Canine Conditioning. You were mentioning a few minutes ago that you started running when you were working on your dissertation. And I know from looking at your bio, you had a previous career in higher education. And at what point with your dog, when you started realizing, hey, I need to do some conditioning with this, at what point did the light bulb go on and say, this might be a second career or something I can transfer or transition out of higher education into doing what essentially is teaching, just at a different level and to a different audience?
Exactly. So, what happened was when I started learning about the canine fitness, I was doing it just for my own dogs. And then people started seeing me doing stretching and doing exercises. And they started to ask me to give seminars. They're like, can you give us a seminar on this? I'm like, sure. And so it basically started out, I was just using that to earn some additional income to pay for my gas money and for my trainer, to go to train my dog. And so I had basically, I had a person who could not, it was actually, you're out near Pittsburgh. It was a seminar that I actually did out in Pittsburgh, and a person wanted to come and she couldn't make it. And she said, gosh, I really would love to come and do your seminar. I can't make it. And I said, well, what if I throw some videos together for you and go over some of the stuff I'm teaching? And that was my first income I brought. I basically made 4 YouTube videos. I charged her $97 and I did one video a week for a month. And eventually that grew into my first online course for canine fitness. And the first couple times I offered it, I was making, the first time I offered the full course and marketed it as a course, I made around $5,000. And I'm
curious, how long ago was that? Because I know the idea of videos, even 10 years ago, people would go, well, that's really strange. How does that work?
I'm trying to think. My one business, I officially, formalized it as an LLC. I think it was around 2014, and this was before that because it hadn't really planted a seed in my mind of a business. I think it was before then. Before I don't even know if I had my business name, then. And so I did the online videos, and my background is in education. I was at the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers, and my research was online teaching and learning. So for me to put it online was just kind of an easy, next step for me to do, because that was kind of what I was doing at the university, was learning about online teaching and learning. And so I was quickly, able to throw together an online course. And I was still only thinking about it, additional income. I was like, if I can make, $100 a month, or if I can make $1,000 a month, and that was my goal. And basically I met up with I think it was on Facebook. Somebody was following me on Facebook, saw my conversations, and they're like, you have to come meet my mentor. You have to come meet Jane Dewar, my mentor. And she's so awesome. And what happened was, she's my business coach and mentor and friend. And basically some people had seen me on social media and seen what I was doing, and they saw kind of a bigger picture for me. And I got involved with a community of entrepreneurs. And, my background, my parents, my dad was an engineer. My mom was a nurse. I did not grow up in a family where people own their own business. I didn't know people who were entrepreneurs. It was not something I was exposed to. So once I started meeting these people and was introduced to my friend and mentor, Jane Duber, and they basically kind of saw a much bigger vision for me. And then they kind of helped plant the seed that, this could really be, much bigger than what you're doing, and you can make a lot more. And then it was a couple years of not believing that this could happen. I never thought I could walk away from a tenured associate professor position at a Research One, well-respected university. I just never thought it could happen. And then people planted it in my mind. And then I was like, okay, maybe, but I would be so crazy and stupid to leave the university. And then it took, another year to build up my business and then see financially see that growing. And then once I thought, I'd like to do this full time, it probably took me over another year to build the courage to actually leave my position. So it's been quite a process, but I think a lot of it was being around visionaries and entrepreneurs who could help mentor me and help me see something bigger than what I could see at the time.
I'm always curious because I'm in higher education and I know how higher education can be. What was the impression, if you can remember back, of your colleagues when you finally said, I'm going to give up this tenure track position. I'm going to do this where I'm my own boss? Were some of them maybe like, that's a great idea, I wish I could do that? Or some of them, Dr. Boling, you're crazy. Why the heck are you doing it?
I would say I was surprisingly, when I told the dean, and I gave my notice, they were so supportive. They were extremely supportive. And almost everybody I talked to, they were envious. And they were envious, I wish I could tap into what my passion is, but I don't know what it is. Or, I wish that I could have a passion that I could actually grow to a point where I could leave the university, or I wish I had the courage, to do what you're doing. And so I'm sure some of them thought, oh my gosh, how can you do this? But there was that part of, wow, she's following her dream. She's living the life she wants to live, and she's got the freedom to choose. And they were amazingly supportive. But I will say this, I had a doctoral student who recently graduated, and she is in K through 12 education, and she's had various high level positions. She did pretty much tell me, she's also a friend of mine, and she was kind of like, you're crazy and you can't leave. And what about your health insurance? And what about this? And what about that? She pretty much did kind of tell me you can't leave. or she even told me when I left, she's like, well, I thought you were leaving too soon. No, that was another friend, actually. That was another friend. So I had, one friend that was probably, she was very supportive. And then when I made the decision, then she admitted to me, she thought that I was doing it a little bit too soon. And then my other friend just told me straight out, you can't leave. Yeah, but the others were, like I said, I think a lot of them, and they even told me that they were very, very happy for me, and some were, like I said, they were kind of wishing that they had something that they could turn to or fall back on, or have that kind of freedom of choice, and they didn't feel like they had that ability and that choice.
We're talking with Erica Boling. She's the owner of Northeast Canine Conditioning. For those of us who have dogs that move with them regularly, we recognize how important it is to condition them. But for somebody who maybe they meet you for the first time, and they don't understand exactly what you do, kind of explain to the listeners, and to me too, so I can better explain it to people who listen to it. Why does somebody need to condition their dog? Why? I mean, I know many people say, well, I take my dog out for a walk or a jog 2 or 3 times a week. And I know that actually when I mentioned I was interviewing you to a friend of mine who's involved working with tactically said, oh, if this is a good interview, I need you to give me her name because I know some of the officers I work with are looking for more information for training their dogs, not how to sniff, but how to be conditioned to do the demands of the job.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it kind of varies depending on the audience you're talking to. In the pet dog world, we've got almost 60%. It's well over 50% of the pet dog population is overweight or just completely obese and morbidly obese. And they've done research and they're seeing that with obesity, some of these dogs on average are dying 2 years younger. And for some breeds, it's even more than 2 years. Some of the research I was looking at, some dogs were on average dying 3 years younger, because of the health conditions and stuff related to being obese. So one of the things with our inactive dogs or dogs that aren't getting enough exercise is their health. We're seeing an increase in the veterinary, the amount we're paying to keep them healthy through the veterinary fees. We're seeing more diseases and health-related issues related to our dogs being obese. Also, in a lot of times when people are having behavior problems with their dogs, every single time I've talked to people having behavior problems with their dogs, the first question I ask is, what does your dog's regular daily and weekly activity look like? And I have yet to have anybody answer that question where I felt like their dog was getting sufficient exercise. And I think not all, but I think a lot of the behavior issues that are happening that people have, no matter what kind of dog, that a lot of this could be nipped in the bud if these dogs were being, had more stimulation mentally and physically. And even my own dogs, I've got high drive working dogs. And if they sit around and do nothing for a few days, like, they are not fun. And if they were in inexperienced hands, they could potentially become dangerous, because they're going to take all that energy and they're going to turn it into negative things. And so for a lot of people, and for like the pet dog people, they don't need these, elite athletes. They don't need them, climbing 6 foot, 7 foot walls and jumping 1.2 meter hurdles. But they want a dog that listens to them, and they want a dog that's not bouncing off the walls, driving them crazy and, ripping apart the couch and getting neurotic behaviors because they have all this energy and nothing to do with it. And then for the sport dogs, the sport dog world is just exploding. It's just completely exploding from, agility and dock diving and fly ball. And so here you're getting some of these pet dogs that are not conditioned, they're not healthy, they're overweight, and their owners are putting them into these sports that are very, demanding and can be hard on the body. And then you have dogs getting injured. And then you have the more elite athletes that are conditioned for the sports, but not conditioned well enough. And they're putting them in positions where the dogs are getting hurt. In some instances, dogs are dying from heat stroke, from injuries that could have been prevented. They're being retired early. And in the working dog world, which is kind of where my real passion and my heart is, when it comes to the working dog world, if you have a bomb dog that can't do its job, if you have a police dog that's doing pursuit and is, getting fatigued and is losing the track, because they're tired, you're now looking at a situation that could be life or death for the dog, for the handler, for the community members. It's serious stuff now. And we see dogs with these types of dogs that are so highly driven. Also, I mentioned the danger of heat stroke. And so what really drives me is I want these dogs to be fit and healthy. I'd like to help them be injury free. But to me, one of the biggest driving things is, especially with the working dogs, is if we can keep these dogs in peak physical condition, they're going to do their jobs better. And that is impacting lives, human lives and canine lives, and can be saving human lives and canine lives. And so to me, that is very, very powerful and very important for why we need to be looking at canine fitness. And even we've got research studies to show our detection dogs that are doing scent work, when they are overweight and when they are not fit, it affects their accuracy in the detection work. So, if you're at a public event and there's somebody planting a bomb, You don't want that fat Labrador, to be missing that bomb. You want them to find that bomb. And, it's, to me, it's really serious. And especially in the working dog world where they are not putting enough or if any attention on this. And it has to be, it needs to be something they start putting more attention on and focusing on.
I know that many people who are listening to this may not understand some of the terms and things that you've used. I know one of the things you've used a number of times is high drive or high drive dogs. And some people like me, it's like, I have Labradors. I love Labradors. I don't know what it is. And I don't know if they're classified as high drive. I know when I give them a day off about 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, it's like, Jesus, we need to go outside and do something because you're driving me up the wall.
Yeah.
And other people, they just, they say, I'm going to get a rescue dog. You don't know what you're getting. So if you can kind of define or explain for people who don't understand, what do you mean by a high drive dog?
Yeah, the kind of dogs that normally first come to mind when I'm thinking about some of these working dogs is they've got a high energy level. And also there's different types of energy. You can have this nervous energy, and you can have this what's nice. And if you get a really good working dog that has the kind of high drive that you want, they have a really high energy, and they have an ability to take this energy, and if trained correctly, to focus that energy on something, on like if you train them right on the work that they're doing. And so what I love about these dogs is that, they have the energy and the focus to just go, and go. Like they will go for hours. And, if you think about the dog that you go for, let's say, a 5-mile hike, or you go take them, running for 2 hours, and you bring them home. And, a lot of dogs might just go and just crash for the whole day. But if you've got this real kind of high energy, high intensity dog, like you could have your dog out there all day long and bring them home, and they don't even show that they're tired. And in training, I love the intensity and the energy of these dogs, because if you train them correctly, you put all that energy and intensity in the focus of the work. But the danger is when you can't release that or focus that energy and drive, you get this dog that you take it out for an hour after work. You want to sit down and have dinner. You want to, do grading for your, the homework from your students from the, the day before. You want to have a nice chat with your spouse. And for this dog, that 1 hour of running was not sufficient. They want to go, they want to work, they want to have something to do. And so it's a combination of there's different types of drives. You think of prey drive, think of like hunting dogs, or not just hunting dogs. I don't know how your dogs, when they see a squirrel or a rabbit, they just go into kind of that crazy mode. And then, like I said, you do have dogs that can have this crazy energy and crazy drive, but there are some dogs, kind of what differentiates it from the ones that might be successful in the sport or work is some of them, it can be harder to channel and focus it onto a single job or an activity that you're doing. So it's kind of a combination of a mental state, but also that physical energy to be able to go and go and go.
And I know you were mentioning that when you get to the working dog level, that very often having a fit dog can make the dog more efficient. And I know that to train a dog, whether it's a bomb dog or a narcotics detection dog or, a search and rescue dog, is thousands and thousands of hours and thousands of dollars. And I don't know this, and I don't know if you do, how much of the training when they do this and when they're given to the handler, how much emphasis is placed on the importance of physical conditioning, not just the conditioning for the skills that they need for the job?
Yeah. From a lot of the people that I've interacted with and spoken to, it's really the exception to find trainers or organizations or agencies where that is an explicit focus. I would say in the sport dog world, we're starting to see more awareness. Definitely in the agility dog world, it's becoming more common. In a lot of parts of the working dog world, it's kind of just starting to build awareness, but it's still kind of at its initial stages in a lot of the lines of work. And when I talk to some of the police agencies, when I've talked to some of the people, in the military, the search and rescue people, they know it's important. They're out there training, but when it comes to, do you have a structured program? Do you consciously have oh, I'm going to work on this cardio for today, or I want to build my dog's strength, or, it's like they're aware of it, and they'll be like making sure they're getting out and their dogs are getting active, partly because if they don't, the dogs are going to drive them crazy because they need work to do. But when I talk to people as far as having a focused, kind of a structured, kind of a directed plan for fitness, almost none of them that I've talked to, they don't have a structured, explicit focus on it. There are some, but they're the exception. Like I talked to one, I was at one conference, and it was a private company that imported dogs from Europe, and they would train them and they would sell them. They were all detection dogs. I wasn't sure. I'm not sure if they specialized just in the bomb, but it was just detection dogs, and they would bring the dogs in, they would train them, and then they would sell them all over the world. And this was one of the very, very few, like one or two out of all the people I've spoken to, that they actually had a fitness program, and they could tell me, all the dogs, they take the 4-wheeler out, they all get their running, and they, it wasn't like a full balance program. They were missing components, but they were very conscious that they had a calendar, they had a schedule, where the dogs were getting this exercise. And I do also know of one search and rescue organization out in California, and they do have kind of scheduled time. They've got the treadmills, and they do have some scheduled, focused cardio work and stuff like that. And again, a lot of them don't have the knowledge. They're kind of missing components of what I would call a balanced program, a fit program. But I would say those organizations or individuals that are doing that are very much in the minority.
And I know you've mentioned you have 3 different types of programs. Intro to canine conditioning, kind of conditioning programs for sporting dogs, whether they're hunting dogs or they're dogs who are involved in organized sports like dock jumping and agility, and then the working dogs. And I know that each program would be slightly different because the goals of the owners or the handlers is different, but the whole idea is to make the dog fit. So you mentioned a well-balanced program. In just general terms, I mean, all of us are familiar with well-balanced programs for humans. We know that the majority of us don't do it, even though we should.
Yes.
How does it work for dogs? I mean, how do you get a dog stronger? Do you have little doggy dumbbells?
Yeah. So when I talk about a balanced program, we talk about, we want to have cardio, you want to have aerobic and anaerobic, we want to have flexibility and stretching, we want to do body awareness, we want to do strengthening. So, so one of the things is, what's great is they do have fitness equipment that is made for dogs. And you can do a lot of the canine physical therapists, like if your dog is rehabbing from surgery and injury, they'll use some of these types of exercises for rehab. But a lot of these exercises are good for just general fitness. And that's how I got introduced to it, because my dog had an injury, and part of his rehabilitation was balancing on an exercise disc, and, placing his paws on an exercise peanut, a big ball, and doing balancing exercises. And that was kind of how I got introduced to it. So, there are focused exercises, like my one dog, he's more developed in the muscles in the hindquarters and less developed in the shoulders. And he's limped a couple times, and anytime he's had an injury, it's been in the front end. So I'll do shoulder exercises where I teach him to kind of, target his paw and raise it up over his shoulder, and press into I'm holding something in my hand. And so you can teach them, exercise. You can do 3-legged stands where they're, balancing on 3 legs, and, that's helping to develop core strength and balance. And then without the equipment, you can also do things like if you're trotting up a hill. It's just like humans, we're doing cardio and it's taking strength. We can do sprinting. I even know some people, they're, human sprinters and runners, they have like the parachutes that you can attach. Well, they'll even do that with dogs. They'll put a harness on the dog, and they'll attach the parachute so that it builds resistance. So you're building cardio and you're also building strength. And then you can teach your dog, just taking some food and luring your dog with a piece of food, and do some stretching and positioning them. And so it's very much like what a balanced program would be for humans. But then you think about, okay, how can this apply to dogs? And like plyometric exercises for humans, those explosive movements. So in the backyard, I have a series of like 5-6 little jumps, and my dog does, these bounce jumping exercises, which in humans we have the jump exercises for plyometric exercises. So I'm kind of introducing that, to my students and teaching them, okay, this is a plyometric exercise. A lot of your sports, you want this explosive movement, dock diving. You want the dog to be running and jumping and exploding at the end of the dock. And so I teach the owners and handlers I teach them about these concepts, and then, okay, what does that look like for the dogs, and how do these exercises, how do you do that with your dog so you can help develop stronger hindquarters and faster movements and more explosive movements, and to support them in that kind of work that they do.
I know as somebody who's had a dog with a chronic injury, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I lost a dog to epilepsy. I know every time the neurologist would do a follow-up and listen to her heart, she'd say, I don't know what you're doing with her, but keep doing it. And it was basically taking her out in the woods and the equivalent of fartlek training. When she wanted to run and jump, we would do that. When she wanted to walk, we'd do that. And I know for some people, they're going to look at it and they're going to say, well, they're just dogs. But other people are going to say, this is something that I need to know. I go to a personal trainer, I can do this. For people who are listening to this and they're listening and they want to know more about Northeast Canine Conditioning, you mentioned you have online programs.
Yep.
You also do face-to-face seminars. And if somebody's listening and say, I've got 8 or 9 people, I think I could put this together. Do you do individual ones, or is there a schedule? We'll have extensive lists, links to your webpage.
Yeah, on my website is Northeast Canine Conditioning. It's Northeast and the letter K and the number 9, Canine Conditioning. The most of the stuff that you see on my website that I offer are online, because I can reach more people and have a bigger impact. I do have people that bring me in and I do conferences. I do present at national, international conferences, and then organizations and groups will bring me in to do like workshops. As far as I don't do so much individually, it would have to be, somebody who is geographically near me. And a lot of times, I've got students in Israel, South Africa, Greece, Scotland, Ireland, Great Britain. I've had clients in South Korea. And so, I love the international component and being able to reach more people and affect more lives online. But I have like an introductory canine conditioning course. I have my elite canine athlete that's kind of more for the sport dog people. And then I just opened up the first session of my Mission Ready Canine that is specific for your police, your military, and search and rescue canine handlers and protection and detection work. And then my most popular program and the most comprehensive is the Elite Canine Athlete Program that leads to becoming a Certified Canine Athlete Specialist. And this is to help people learn how to not only do these activities with your dog, but also how to kind of look at the dog in front of you, kind of assess what is the dog doing, what sport, what work, what are the demands of that activity, and then how do you kind of customize a fitness program for that dog and handler's needs. And so it gets more comprehensive. So I have to teach about fitness, exercise science, but then also program design and program development. And then I get a lot of dog trainers and canine professionals who then want to teach others. And so because of my educational background and my business background, this is my only program where they actually get an education from me on not just the fitness, but then how do you create fitness seminars? How do you create classes to teach dogs and handlers and owners? And also, how do you, if you want to do this and bring it into your business, how do you market it and how do you sell it? So I kind of hit it at all angles using my expertise in the canine fitness world, my expertise as an educator, and then also my expertise as a business owner, entrepreneur, and my background in online teaching and learning.
And I'm curious, this is just me thinking aloud when I hear, as a physiologist, I understand the importance of movement, et cetera. I would think, especially for working dogs, the programs that are spending this tremendous amounts of money to train these dogs would be looking at this and saying, wait a second, if these dogs are fit and they have a potential to be a working dog for a longer period of time. So even though it costs money to train them and to get the training, isn't it almost potentially a better idea maybe? Because then you've got a fit dog that doesn't lose time because of injury and potentially can do its job for a longer period of time before it has to be retired.
Yeah, exactly. These dogs, a lot of them are being imported from overseas. We're trying to get more and more bred within the United States for, to fill these, the high need that we have for some of these positions and the work that the dogs are doing. And just even getting an untrained dog, you're looking at thousands of dollars. And then you're looking at, some of the academies for the training. It could take months to get that dog handler team ready before they can actually, like for police dogs, before they can hit the streets. And then you're hoping to have a good working career. You don't want to invest thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars into the dogs and the training. And while the dog and handler team are being trained, that's taking them, off the street while they're learning to work together. And you don't want to have to, 2 years later find out, or 3 years later have to find out you have to start from scratch again because a dog has to retire early or has got an injury and can't continue working. Now you got to go bring in a new dog. Even if it's a handler who is experienced, they need to have that time together to become that partner. So that you're losing some of that time while they're working together to, get back and be operational. And yeah, when you look at the big, government type jobs in the work, you're looking at potential millions of dollars they could be saving if they can get these dogs and keep them fit longer. And it also comes into the selection process. A lot of times when they're choosing to purchasing these dogs, they're choosing them on kind of by the breed and the drive, right? The drive. And that's like number one. And the structure of the dog is not necessarily, they don't give that top priority. And what's happening too is when I teach people about the canine fitness, I teach them how to kind of structurally look at that dog and kind of structurally analyze that dog for balances and imbalances, and looking at, there might be potential weaknesses already that we can see. So what I like to do is expand being able to teach people about fitness, but the people who are actually purchasing these working dogs and going overseas or importing them in, helping educate them on how to, I call it the critical eye, how to have that critical eye to observe that dog in front and say, this dog's weak in the back, this dog's straight in the shoulders, this dog, it looks like the way it's moving, it looks like there's an imbalance here, and, maybe we better wait before we jump on board and make this one of our purchases.
And I'm curious, you mentioned a few minutes ago that with one of your dogs, you noticed that when she does have an injury, or he does have an injury, it's in the front. What is it, and that he was weaker in the front? What is it that you think that is the reason why he's weaker in the front? Is this genetic? Is this something that maybe when he was younger, he had different movement problems?
Part of it is his structure. So when one of the things I teach about structure is what we call angulation. You look at the shoulders and the hindquarters and kind of where those bones meet. And basically what happens is if you think of like a show-line German Shepherd, they've got long kind of sloping backs, their hind ends kind of long and sloping. And then think of like a Mastiff. They're more kind of straight, and so I teach people to kind of look at that angulation. And basically what happens is you want kind of moderation. Like, I don't want a dog that's real long in the back. If you think about a weightlifter, you think of, they're kind of square, muscular. You don't have, like, I'm tall and thin and have a really long back. I have a lot of lower back problems. I don't have that muscle, supporting this long torso. And so it's the same with the dogs. I want a more of a square dog. I don't want a real long back dog. And when it comes to angulation, I want moderation, because if you have excessive angulation, you might have more reach of stride, more range of motion, but you lose stability. And if you have a dog that's very straight, you might have more stability, but you're kind of missing some of that ease of movement and that fluidity, like, in a border collie, a shepherd. And so sometimes what happens is by the structure and the build of the dog, if you have a high impact activity, it's like doing a Saint Bernard on an agility course versus a border collie. Their structure, if I did as many jumps and as much jumping and running with that Saint Bernard, it's going to feel it in its body differently than a border collie because of how they're structured. So part of it can be the structure of the dog, and then also in combination to the structure, the demands of the activity you're doing with the dog. So certain sports and certain jobs are going to put more stresses on the body in certain parts of the body. And if you aren't properly conditioning and strength training, then you're basically setting your dog up for injury if they might genetically, structurally be weaker in an area, and then you put them in a situation that's very physically demanding.
And I know this is speculation, and I know relatively speaking, compared to the sporting dog world, the working dog world is relatively newer. Do you foresee that people looking at this in the future, once we start looking at costs and the effects of conditioning, that maybe what we think of as good working dog breeds, maybe 15, 20 years down the line, we may categorize even more and say this specific breed is good for this sort of work, but we found long-term it doesn't make sense for that sort of work? Or am I kind of overreaching with my thought process?
I mean, in a way, some of this has happened a little bit already. For example, with some of the police and military dogs, some of the shift to the Belgian Malinois over, German Shepherds, or choosing Shepherds and, over other breeds. And so they are, they do find in some working situations and, bloodhounds doing scent work, and some of the spaniels they're using for some of the detection work, they do kind of weed out kind of almost genetically and breed-wise dogs that have more capabilities than others in certain areas and, tendencies and stuff. So in some areas, we do already kind of see certain types of breeds, being gravitated towards certain types of jobs. So I don't know, in the working dog world, it's like we kind of already see that, because if you don't do well, you don't make it, you're kind of a washout. And so, if you look at it breed wise, they kind of self-eliminate. But when we look at the sport dog world, it's interesting because there's kind of different rules of thought. You have people that have their dog and their dog's a passion and they want to do an activity with the dog. So even though I might be like, okay, I know a Saint Bernard is not the best dog for agility, but I love my Saint Bernard and I love agility, so I'm going to do it anyways. And I might not beat the Border Collie, but but I'm going to do it and do it, safely. And some people will be like, okay, I love agility, and I'm going to buy a dog that I know can do well in agility. So I think the danger here is when people aren't aware of this, they're not aware of the fitness needs, they're not aware of the impact of the structural impact of the dogs. What happens is you get somebody who has that off breed, the breed that maybe physically is not at its best for that particular job, and the person who works that dog is not as knowledgeable. And you kind of have these expectations, and not realizing that it's not just a matter of training, but it's also an issue of how is your dog built, and what's the dog's breeding, and what are the drives of that dog. So I do think more knowledge in that regard. And some people are they love their breeds. They're like, I'm a boxer person, I'm a Border Collie person, and it doesn't matter what sport they do, they're like, this is my breed. So hopefully there's nothing wrong with that, but I would like them to move forward and be thoughtful and smart in what they're doing. And if they are going to take that St. Bernard and they are going to do agility, let's think of what we can do to do it more safely and protect the dog.
And I would imagine also with that St. Bernard, maybe not quite the same volume that the
exactly.
Border Collie does.
Yep, exactly. And so that's where I'd like to see, just people being more thoughtful in what they're doing and in their training. I think when it comes to the sport dog world, the majority of the people, they kind of have their favorite sport, they have their favorite breed. A lot of times they have the dog first. That's what happened to me with search and rescue. Was I had the dog first. I did search and rescue, and it turned out she wasn't the best dog for search and rescue. And then I got a higher drive dog, a dog, that was bred for work. And a lot of people, that's what happens is when they first start in these activities, when it's by choice, is they kind of have that dog at home, and then they're like, okay, I want to go out and do something with my dog. And it's not always what they do is not always, the best match for their dog, say physically, athletically, but they're out there, they're active, they're bonding, it's just making sure they do it safely is my concern.
We're talking with Erica Boling. She is the owner of Northeast Canine Conditioning. I think she's done a great job of explaining whether you have a sporting dog, a dog that you just like to get out in the woods with, or a working dog because you're involved with an organization. Physical fitness is important for you and the dog. I often say if you're going to do something, do it either better or differently than somebody else so you can differentiate yourself. And that's why I was so excited when I saw the Instagram post that she was making. We're going to have extensive show notes where you can get more information if you're interested in any of the programs that she offers. And I want to thank you, Dr. Boling, for taking time to talk to Moving to Live. I'm a dog person, and I think anybody who has a dog needs to recognize that as you mentioned at the beginning, there's so many dogs that are obese, and whether it's a working dog or just your family pet, the more fit it is, the better of quality of life they have. And with any luck, the longer you'll have possession of that dog as a companion, a friend, and a working dog.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Moving to Live. Make sure you check out the show notes for contact information for our latest guest, as well as links about all the things we talked about. Intro and exit music is Traveling Light by Jason Shaw. You can subscribe to Moving to Live on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play, and be notified about new episode releases. Have any questions, comments, or suggestions? Drop us an email, mov2liv@gmail.com. Connect with us on Twitter or Instagram, both _MOV2LIV. Please tell your friends about Moving to Live. It's a go-to place for information for movement and exercise professionals and amateur aficionados who understand that movement is part of what makes your life complete. Until next week, keep on moving.